Today I'll be going over chapter 29 of Alanna Nash's book, Baby Let's Play House, Elvis Presley and the Woman Who Loved Him. Chapter 29 is titled Girls, Guns, and the President. In October 1970, Elvis and Priscilla went to Hawaii, redeeming the vacation that Tom Parker had finagled out of Alex Schufe when the two men signed the contract for Elvis's Vegas engagement. On the vacation, too, were Vernon and Dee, the Espositos, the Shillings, and the Gambles. Elvis had nothing scheduled on his calendar until January when he would return to Vegas for his shows. Elvis had always loved Hawaii, but after his big fight with Priscilla there, it wasn't the same. One of the guys suggested they continue their vacation in Europe since Elvis never went anywhere else. They decided they'd request expedited passports when they returned to the mainland, but when Parker found out about their planned trip overseas, he squashed the idea immediately. Parker told Elvis his rabid fans overseas would be insulted if Elvis went there on vacation before he even performed a concert there. Nash writes, as usual, Elvis relented and accepted Parker's suggestion to go to the Bahamas for 2 weeks instead. The Colonel had contacts there, he said, and they'd love the gambling and the deep-sea fishing. But the sea was too choppy for the latter, and the trip was largely a bust. Rain and hurricane winds kept them virtually trapped at the Paradise Island Hotel, where Elvis sat in with an Irish band, the Witnesses, and resumed fighting with Priscilla. The group returned home earlier than expected. Gossip columnist Rona Barrett saw Elvis at the blackjack tables on October 30th with a girl on each arm. In her November 6th column, she wrote, everybody is commenting on how good Elvis Presley looks these days while he's having fun at the International. Elvis's answer in response to such compliments, that's what a bad marriage does for you. Elvis began calling Joyce Bova again in the middle of December, asking her to come out to California. She couldn't because her committee was investigating the My Lai incident, and she was working 12-hour days. The two went back and forth until Elvis told her he was making arrangements to fly her out the next day. She told him, I can't. Elvis, you know I can't. I don't see why you can't come here. He started on her again, saying maybe she wasn't interested in him after all, until she snapped at him and said, anyway, what about your wife? There were a few more words between the two before she heard him hang up on her. On January 26, 1970, Elvis returned to Vegas for his shows that would again receive critical acclaim. Billabaloo began dressing Elvis in one-piece jumpsuits made of stretch gabardine, which gave Elvis much more flexibility and room for movement. Elvis said, I got the idea from a karate suit. Most of the costumes were either all black or all white. Aside from kissing women at the stage, he also interacted with them by handing out scarves. Charlie would stand behind Elvis and give him scarf after scarf, and then Elvis would wipe his forehead with one and give it to the shrieking ladies. Nash writes, everything was coming together now, the return to the stage, the resurgence of fame, and the industry respect. Now it was time to test the waters for touring to see if the faithful only came to Vegas or if they were still out there tucked away in the small towns and walking the streets of the bigger cities. At the end of February, Elvis flew to Houston on Kirk Kerkorian's private jet and performed his first concert outside of Vegas since 1961. He did 4 concerts in 2 days at the Houston Livestock Show, breaking attendance records by some 10,000, but it almost didn't happen. Myrna Smith of the Sweet Inspirations remembers, the promoters didn't want us to go because it was in Texas, and at that time, they weren't as liberal as they are today. They told Elvis not to bring those black girls. Elvis replied, okay, but I'm not coming either. Then to show them, he made the promoter's daughter chauffeur the Sweet Inspirations around in a limousine. Priscilla flew in for the second day's show as Houston papers reported the marriage falling apart. Since October 1969, whenever Elvis was in Texas, he would fly out to Dallas and check into hotels under the name John Burroughs. There, he would spend time with a stewardess, sometimes more than one. Lamar had said Elvis was going to the American Airlines Stewardess College in Fort Worth to look for women, just as he and Rex had done in his Army days. Nash writes, if, indeed, one of the world's most desired men flew around the country looking for girls, it speaks not only to his insatiable need for female companionship, and particularly the companionship of women who all dressed alike, as in twinship, but also to his desire to be the aggressor in relationships, since women had been literally fainting at his feet for decades. Soon he would start sending out for hookers in Vegas, but mostly for the guys, Joe says. He said, "We were so jaded by this point that it had become too much trouble to go out and look for women." Nash says they'd switch girls as the night wore on, but according to Joe, only on occasion would Elvis disappear in his room with one, saying he'd rather watch. His preference was almost always two women together. Joe says, Elvis romanticized sex. Paying by the hour grounded it all too well. Back in Houston, a reporter asked Elvis if he planned on making any more movies. Elvis said, "I hope to. I'd like to make better films than I made before." Then he asked Parker, "Is there anything in the works?" Parker slyly said, "I can't commit myself." But a month later, Parker secured a $500,000 deal with Kerkorian for That's the Way It Is, a documentary about Elvis's 1970 summer Las Vegas engagement. Although Parker had wanted $1 million for it, the film remained a prestigious project with Oscar-winning director Dennis Sanders attached to it and a planned theatrical release. Jerry remembers Elvis loved it. He must have seen it 10 times. Elvis was proud the staging succeeded, especially after pushing back against Parker's resistance to placing the musicians and singers prominently around him. He liked to be cocooned by them because he found it comforting. After the Houston engagements, Elvis flew back to California to spend time with Priscilla. Although their marriage was rocky, they went house hunting in Palm Springs and found one in early April at 845 Chino Canyon, where they put $13,000 down and signed a mortgage for $85,000. Priscilla thought Elvis was trying at their marriage. When she turned 25, he threw her a surprise birthday party, but she still felt I was always a little girl to him. Elvis picked out the furniture for the Palm Springs house, and it wasn't anything she would have chosen. They were big masculine pieces. Now that they had baby Lisa, Priscilla felt that the Hillcross house was too small. And so at the end of the year, she found a house in the Holmby Hills area of Beverly Hills that they would buy. 144 Monavale Drive was $339,000, and it boasted 5 bedrooms with 2 more in the guest house, and the property offered much more privacy. Priscilla decorated the home to her liking, but kept some of the big couches and modern furniture that her husband liked. Priscilla reflected on how she used to be. If he said, "That's a terrible color on you," I'd change my clothes immediately. For years, I was self-conscious that my neck was too long because Elvis always told me to wear my shirt collars up. Now I realize, all those pictures where he had his collar up? He was the one who was self-conscious about his neck. Nash writes, that hadn't really dawned on her when he started with Bill Ballew's Napoleonic collars, but now there was no denying it. As she continued to simplify her look and uncover her natural beauty, Elvis piled on his own plumage and wrapped himself in an ever-increasing flamboyance and fantasy costumes. One white outfit was so fringy and batwing that when he raised his arms, he appeared to take flight, and he was already thinking jewel-encrusted capes for next year. When Elvis got his first one, Ballou remembers, he was like a child who had gotten a new toy and couldn't wait to play with it. He would prance and dance around the floor, twirling the cape, and ask the guys, "What do you think? How do you like this?" Nash says, in a way, Elvis was becoming his own skewed vision of the Priscilla he had dolled up and created, taking her from schoolgirl to Dracula's party queen overnight. Priscilla said, "It's true. It was a flamboyance that he didn't have to do. It was a cry, I think. From that point on, he began to self-destruct." One way Elvis was self-destructing was his return to binge spending. 4 days after buying the Palm Springs home, he purchased a 6-door 1969 Mercedes limo. Following that was a 1971 Stutz Blackhawk that he handed over to George Bears for customization. Then he bought a Mercedes for himself and one for Jerry and a house for Joe Esposito while he was at it. Then there were the gun purchases. In 3 nights, he spent $20,000 on firearms for himself and anyone and everyone, girlfriends, the guys, even people on the street. He also became more obsessed with badges, with all the guys being deputized and armed at all times. Nash writes, it wasn't just about power and control or even for protection when death or kidnap threats came, as several did in Las Vegas, beginning that summer of 1970. Deep down, it was part of his paradox, his lifelong obsession with authority, going back to Vernon's incarceration, his boyhood visits to the prison, and the shame that made his child's face flame scarlet. The last half of 1970, Elvis increased his expenses by expanding his team, persuading RCA producer Felton Jarvis to leave his job and work for him directly. That June in Nashville's Studio B, The two mixed longtime collaborators such as Scotty, DJ, and Floyd Kramer with new musicians, bassist Norbert Putnam and drummer Jerry Kerrigan. James Burton served as the session leader. On the first night, they recorded 8 songs in 10 hours, and after 5 nights, Felton had completed 35 masters. Though they didn't match the American studio sessions, it marked Elvis's last major burst of productivity, with quality still strong without, bridged over troubled water, You Don't Have to Say You Love Me, I've Lost You, Nash writes. Norbert Putnam was surprised to see that while the food was catered and the players were told to order anything they liked, Elvis was so sheltered that he never learned anything about cuisine and always ate the same thing, a cheeseburger, fries, and a Coke. One night, Norbert told him that he learned to find the notes on the bass by listening to Elvis's first records. Norbert remembers, at the end of the conversation, he looked at me and took a deep breath and said, "Well, I guess it's time to go be Elvis." And I got chill bumps because he went from being this regular guy to having this voice come out. He could go from this real deep baritone to a scream that Paul McCartney would have loved to be able to do every night. And I don't think he even thought twice about it. It was all natural to Elvis. It was subconscious. In August, there were changes to the Vegas lineup. The hotel's new musical director was Joe Guercio. Cissy Houston of the Sweet Inspirations took off on a solo career, and subbing in for her had been Millie Kirkham, but Millie had to get back to Nashville, so in stepped Kathy Westmoreland. 25-year-old Kathy was only supposed to sub for 3 weeks, but she ended up staying 7 years. She was a top session singer in Los Angeles, but she was very naive, especially when it came to love. About 2 weeks after she joined the band, Elvis invited her up to his suite. She remembers, "I thought it would be a party, but he said he just wanted to get to know me. When I walked in that room, there were all these knockout beautiful women waiting to meet Elvis. He came into the room and walked directly over and sat next to me." Elvis was interested in her background, especially that her father had sung in MGM films like The Great Caruso and The Student Prince, aligning with his fixation for Mario Lanza. She was his type at 5'1" and had been a runner-up in the Miss Teenage America contest in 1962. They hit it off immediately, but when he talked to her about his marital problems, it made her uncomfortable. Then he matter-of-factly told her that he didn't have that much longer to live and his family died young. She remembers, "He told me that he knew exactly how much time he had, that he was going to die at the age of 42, close to the age of his mother." She was shocked when he told her, but she was very attracted to him emotionally, his humor, everything. She said, "He reminded me a lot of my own family," Nash writes. When she gave him her virginity, she thought they might actually make a go of it. They carried around the same metaphysical books. We were both on this search for the truth. And he told her Priscilla had no interest in the spiritual dimension, though he insisted he had an open marriage. He kept saying, "I wish she would divorce me so I wouldn't have to divorce her." Kathy knew he had other girlfriends and that she would be sandwiched in between. But when he said, "I love you," and then moved on, she was dazed and hurt, even as she had called a halt to the affair at one point, finding no valid excuse for adultery. The friendship at least would remain, along with the professional association. On stage, he called her the little girl with the beautiful high voice. Offstage, she was Minnie Mouse. On August 14th, 1970, while on stage, Elvis admitted to his Vegas audience that he had been hit with the paternity suit. A waitress named Patricia Ann Parker claimed she had become pregnant with his child, and Elvis responded on stage with an angry, forceful denial that shocked many in the audience. Nash writes, 12 days later came a major kidnap assassination threat, which sent Elvis and the guys into overdrive. The colonel called in the FBI and private detective John O'Grady, a former head of the LAPD Hollywood Narcotics Detail, who was already at work investigating the Patricia Parker case. For the next several nights, the entourage stood ready to move in, while Elvis performed with a pistol in each boot. An ambulance stood at the ready. Even Red, now back in the fold, was frightened. Red remembers, "The lights were up in the audience more, and the curtains were closed. That was one of the strangest feelings I've ever had, because when he did his last song, he went down into a very low karate stance to make himself a small target, and Sonny and I came rushing out and stood in front of him, waiting for whatever was coming." Nothing came of the threat, but it left Elvis more intense and defiant, saying he'd rather face a bullet than be intimidated off stage. On August 29th, Joyce Bova arrived in Vegas with her friend Karen. The way things dissolved between Joyce and Elvis didn't feel right with her. She called Joe and he got Elvis on the phone. Elvis said, "You must be psychic, honey. I was just about to call you." And then he invited the girls to a show. In his dressing room after, he greeted them warmly and hugging Joyce, said, "You're even more beautiful than the last time I saw you. You don't know what it means to me, baby, having you here, but it sure took you long enough." Nash writes, Elvis had made it clear that Joyce would be going up to the suite later on, and so she left him alone as he milled about with his other guests, including Ricky Nelson's wife, Chris, and James Aubrey, president of MGM Studios. Aubrey, a powerful Hollywood player known as the Smiling Cobra, and the inspiration for Jacqueline Suzanne's 1969 best-selling book, The Love Machine, was there that night on business since he had green-lighted the documentary Elvis, That's the Way It Is. Elvis found Aubrey's date, 23-year-old model and starlet Barbara Lee, very attractive. He had actually spotted her in the crowd during his show, sitting in a booth front and center. Barbara remembers thinking, "Why would he be looking at me? He could have any girl in this place. Then I'd be damned if he wouldn't be smiling at me again." Joe remembers that Elvis could not take his eyes off her when she walked into his dressing room that night. Elvis said to Sonny, "Man, that's Venus sitting down over there." Barbara and James Aubrey sat at a table in the center of the room. Then as soon as James got up, Barbara remembers, "Elvis swooped in and sat down next to me. He looked into my eyes and that was it. We were both in lust or love or whatever you want to call it. It was like a thunderbolt. He snuck a tiny pencil and piece of paper under the table for my number, and I had no problems writing it down. What girl wouldn't have given him her number? He was the sexiest entertainer on the planet and a beautiful soul. That was just too much to resist." That night, James wanted to make love, but Barbara had no interest. She was replaying what happened in Elvis's dressing room over and over in her head. She had seen Elvis on the Ed Sullivan Show when she was a kid, and she was enthralled then. She even tried to dance like him, and she was promptly sent to her room. Now, not only has she met him, but he wanted to be with her. Meanwhile, Joyce and Karen were walking into Elvis's suite that night on the 30th floor, and much to their surprise, there were a ton of people in it. It was normal, though. Red remembers, there always were a lot of people up there. He wanted an audience of just people to talk, to unwind. And he adds, there were hundreds of girls. Nash writes, sometimes he'd have other performers like Tom Jones or Andy Williams over, or just his own backup groups, the Imperials and the Sweet Inspirations, and they'd sing with him. One night he put on a stack of 45s and asked Myrna Smith to dance. Elvis never flirted with black girls. He made up an excuse when he thought Diana Ross came onto him from the rolled-down window of her limousine. And this was just a friendly spin around the floor. Yet he was still just as uneasy at the idea of dancing as he had been at his parties back at Lauderdale Courts. Myrna thought that it was me shaking, but he was the one who was shaking. We finished the whole song. It was just a warm and comfortable feeling. He was so shy. It was great, wonderful. Though he began this night joking about the kidnapping threat, Elvis's mood shifted abruptly, and he snapped at Joyce in front of the others when she mentioned going to see Engelbert Humperdinck. Then, feeling bad, he took her by the hand and they sat in the living room, and she noticed he started shaking his leg. He told her, "Happens sometimes, baby. When I'm winding down after a show, you know, it's back and forth. It's a back and forth thing, part of the highs and lows, the cycles of having to get myself up to do the show, then coming back down again after." But the shaking got worse and Elvis's speech got faster. Then suddenly he got up and signaled the guys to get rid of everyone in the suite. He put his arm around Joyce's waist and whispered in her ear, "I need you to be with me tonight, honey. Please go to my room. I promise I'll be right there." Nash writes, Joyce felt a hot, shaky rush of emotion. She wasn't sure she wanted to do this, and then rose and led Karen into the bedroom to tell her privately that she wouldn't be going back to the hotel with her. But before they finished, Elvis jerked open the door. Elvis said harshly, "Well, did you tell her?" Karen quickly left. In the bedroom, Elvis continued to be brusque and asked Joyce, "You staying or what?" Joyce's face got hot and she said, "What?" Elvis said, "You're standing there like you got one foot out the door." His eyes were cold now and she could hardly believe he was the same person. He had changed so rapidly it scared her. Elvis said, "What have we got here, darling? A failure to communicate?" He shook his head at her and then said, "I'm just using plain, simple English." They spoke briefly, but his mood didn't lift. Then he opened a dresser drawer and said, "If you're going to stay, then stay, and get this on and get into that bed." Elvis then went into his bathroom. Nash writes, Joyce stood there stunned, the black silk pajama top he had flung at her still hanging from her shoulder. She could barely think straight, but then as she looked around at the suite, overblown and gaudy, she knew there was really only one thing to do. She brushed the flimsy top off and stepped on it on her way to the front door, slamming it so hard that the security guard jumped up and reached for his holster. As she walked away, she hoped that Elvis would come after her with an apology, but he didn't. And as she walked out of the building, she had one consolation. She had just walked out on Elvis Presley. Meanwhile, Elvis looked for the scrap of paper on which Barbara Lee had scribbled her phone number. Nash describes Barbara as tall with dark hazel eyes and high Indian cheekbones. She not only had the smoldering brunette sensuality that Elvis loved, but she was also a Southerner who had come up hard. So I actually looked up a picture of Barbara Lee, and she looks like a mixture of Priscilla and Linda Thompson. Like if they had a baby together, that's what Barbara Lee looks like. Born Barbara Kish in Georgia, she grew up in a children's home, then later married and had a son named Jerry, then moved to Los Angeles after her marriage ended. Elvis felt comfortable with her Southern background, and he was drawn to the vulnerability he sensed in her that night they met, which she recognized had attracted him. Barbara said, I do believe he liked my vulnerability, as my image might have been something more sexy and alluring. In reality, I was just a country girl struggling to survive and accept what life brought me, both good and bad. The day after Barbara met Elvis, she and James had gone from the airport to a party in Malibu, and she was late getting home. As she was walking into her apartment, her phone was ringing, and she knew it was Elvis. He said to her, I've been calling you for days, darling. Where you been? She laughed and said, Oh, Elvis, I've only been gone for a day. Elvis said, Yeah, well, it feels like you've been gone for days. His voice was teasing and sexy. Then he turned serious. I'd like to see you again. When can you come back? She told him she wouldn't be available for a week because she was in the middle of shooting Pretty Maids All in a Row with Rock Hudson. Elvis persisted and asked about the weekend. She had plans with James over the weekend, but she didn't want to tell Elvis that, so they agreed she'd fly out on Thursday and return home the next day, Friday. Nash writes, when Joe picked her up at the airport, he informed her that she couldn't attend the first show. Jim Aubrey was there with an actress, Joe Ann Flug. Barbara had no right to be angry. She was doing the same thing he was, but she was still fuming when Joe took her to the suite Elvis kept specifically for his ladies in waiting, which had a round pink bed atop deep pink carpeting. She assumed it was a daze of seduction, but Elvis would make love to her in his own suite, where all his stuff was. He needed to be around his medications and his books and the boys. In the meantime, she watched TV and called her answering service and wondered what in the world she was doing there in Vegas. Eventually, Charlie Hodge would escort her upstairs to the penthouse where Elvis kissed her hand. Barbara was startled by the constant entourage and the many beautiful women vying for Elvis's attention. She realized he expected her to compete for him despite him inviting her. She remembers, Elvis wanted a woman's undivided attention. He wanted his woman to wait on him and take care of him and be right there next to him. One had to ask permission to go to the bathroom because he wanted to know where his woman was at all times. She told him she found the constant presence of other women exhausting and demeaning. And though he claimed to understand, she knew her only choices were to accept it or walk away. At 3 a.m., Elvis brought her to his bedroom, offering her red pajamas instead of throwing them this time. And she thought the PJs carried a faint scent of Old Spice. She changed in the guest bathroom that he showed her and then sat at the foot of his enormous bed. He said, I'd like you to have this, and then surprised her with a gift, a gold medallion of Jesus. Nash writes, a Jesus term might have been a mood killer for a dazzling actress who had come to Las Vegas to spend the night with rock's reigning sex god. But Barbara had relied on faith to get her through the worst of her childhood, and now Elvis was sharing a part of his. God, Jesus, the Bible became the basis for their relationship. In time, they would get down on their knees and pray together, and the most vulnerable she ever saw him was when he was on his bed, reading scripture and talking about what God meant to him. But in just that moment, a tear came to her eye, and she leaned over and kissed him. That night, kissing was the foreplay, and Barbara felt his lovemaking reminded her of his character in Jailhouse Rock, with the enthusiasm of a teenager. She says it was a dream to be with him, though. They did it twice that night, and after the second time, he asked her if she knew anything about numerology. That's random. She told him she didn't, and he smiled and said, good, when the pupil is ready, the teacher is willing. They would eventually read spiritual books together. Barbara said, he was an old soul. I loved spending private time with him because that is when you saw the real Elvis. But she didn't give herself entirely to him. She said, I loved him with all my heart and soul, but didn't fall in love with him because I really wanted to be with Jim Aubrey. But Elvis was a gift, something good that happened to me. Nash writes, from the beginning, he knew about her son, Jerry, who was 6 years old. He knew, too, that Barbara had given birth to him, that she was a mother. Yet, it never stopped him from wanting to make love with me or be with me. If one doesn't talk about something, then one forgets it exists. And in my case, we didn't talk about my son. Nor did he mention Lisa Marie because I understood what he wanted, and a part of that was fantasy. Having children brings reality into any given situation. Elvis didn't discuss Priscilla, and Barbara was only aware of her through personal items left in the Truesdale bathroom. But Elvis did openly discuss Anne Margaret, particularly his jealousy of Roger Smith. It took him a long time to forget Anne Margaret, as Anne had moved on. When he spoke of her, I could tell it hurt his feelings. Their secret relationship would last on and off for 2 years. He bought her a brown Mercedes and guns to protect herself with, and also clothes and jewelry. I loved my little brown Mercedes, but Elvis was the most excited because he truly loved to give. He loved surprising you when you least expected it. Barbara was well aware that Elvis had a girl for most every night and every occasion. But why not? He was the king. I can't blame him. It kept his stories fresh, and he loved all women, really. He appreciated us all. Nash writes, their relationship was unique for both of them. Soon she would be juggling not just Elvis and James, but also Steve McQueen, with whom she would make the 1972 film Junior Bonner. Elvis never asked her to stop seeing other men, and Barbara was the only woman from whom Elvis tolerated such behavior, otherwise insisting on complete faithfulness. He took pride in stealing James Aubrey's girlfriend, but he couldn't stand the idea of Barbara being with McQueen, whom he otherwise admired, as he did Aubrey. Elvis called McQueen that motorcycle hick, the tough guy actor returning the barb with, that guitar hick. Barbara said, what's ironic is that all three of us were hicks, and I mean that in the most affectionate way. On September 9th, 1970, Elvis launched a 6-city pilot tour: Phoenix, St. Louis, Detroit, Miami Beach, Tampa, and Mobile. The shows quickly sold out, earning nearly $175,000 for 6 nights of work. It signaled his full return to live touring. Elvis by then was slim and healthy and donned giant mutton chops. Parker would arrive in each show's city the day before the performance, and the guys resumed their usual jobs. Joe was foreman, Charlie on stage managing, Lamar running lights, Richard on wardrobe, and Sonny head of security. Dr. Nick was now on the payroll as tour physician. On the first night of the tour, Elvis met a beautiful long-haired brunette named Sherry Williams, who celebrated her 18th birthday in his suite. Sherry lived in Los Angeles, but she accompanied her friend who had met Elvis before to Arizona for the show. She could tell Elvis was interested in her. She remembers, he would be talking to someone and glancing at me out of the corner of his eye. I could tell that there was some kind of connection. Jerry quietly gave her a card with Elvis's phone number on it, but she never called because he was almost twice her age. A month later, Charlie called her friend and invited her friend to the Palm Springs house and told her to bring her friend from the Arizona show. Sherry went to Palm Springs for a few days and slept on the couch and would return again in the fall and winter. Nash writes, as a teenager, she was confused about it all and felt overwhelmed on her visits. Charlie and Joe were nice to her, but the rest of the guys intimidated her. She'd had no male role models in her life and didn't really know how to act around men that age. Then she tried talking to Ricky Stanley because he was more of a peer. But she later learned that Elvis didn't like any of the entourage, not even his stepbrother talking with his girlfriends. It wasn't allowed. He wanted all her attention. Sherry remembers, it was a very complex relationship. He was a lot of things to me: a friend, a brother, a father. He wasn't a lover yet, but he filled a lot of shoes. He and I talked about that a lot. In the late fall of 1970, likely influenced by the Las Vegas threats, Elvis's fascination with law enforcement intensified, and he increasingly focused his attention on the off-duty police officers that were there to protect him rather than on his own entourage. He formed lifelong bonds with detectives Ron Pietrofesso and Jerry Kennedy, who even arranged a blue police uniform for him at his request. When Elvis was on a mission to collect something such as badges, he was never content once he got it. He was already thinking about the next badge he wanted. He convinced the Denver Police Department to give him an honorary badge and then a real one. He had done the same thing with Shelby County Sheriff Roy Nixon in Memphis. Elvis wanted Sheriff Nixon's official badge so that he could legally carry a firearm. But then he saw the badge of all badges that John O'Grady's friend Paul Freese carried, a Federal Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs badge, or BNDD. Elvis was intent on getting one. He had to have it. Nash writes, offstage, his dress was beginning to reflect his compulsion. Not only did he actually wear the Denver police uniform on occasion, but when Regis Wilson's brother Jim joined Elvis's crowd at the Memphian one night, he was shocked to see that Elvis had on a jumpsuit with guns in a holster like a cowboy would wear. In December, Elvis would serve as best man at Sonny and Judy West's wedding. For the ceremony, he would put on a black velvet suit paired with a large gold belt. Then he strapped on an additional belt with a large gold buckle and a sheriff's star. And then he wore the official badge that Sheriff Nixon had given him. Then he added 2 guns in a police shoulder holster. He topped off his look when he stuck a pair of pearl-handled pistols in his waistband and a Derringer in his boot. But he wasn't finished. The chef's kiss to his outfit was a 15-inch Cal Light flashlight. Marty wasn't having Elvis walk into a church with a flashlight and practically had to wrestle it out of his hands. It was daylight. Elvis didn't need a flashlight. Elvis said, "God damn, I hate to give this up." Marty remembers. I'll bet he was the only best man in the history of Memphis to go to the altar with 5 guns on him just to stand up for a groom. Nash writes, the customizing of things also became another obsession, though he had always liked seeing his initials on things, starting with the rifle he got as a boy. It was an aggrandizement that spoke to his vanity, just as he could never pass a mirror without stopping to check himself out. He just had to make sure he was still the king, says Barbara Lee. It was around this time that Elvis began customizing his eyeglasses with the initials EP. But it wasn't enough. He wanted something for the entourage, something that showed they were all one group. He was on a flight with Priscilla one day when together they began sketching out the design for a 14-karat gold charm with the letters TCB laid atop a zigzag lightning bolt, taking care of business in a flash. He had Schwartz and Ablisser jewelers in Beverly Hills make it into pendants and picked up the first 24 on gold chains that fall. Elvis would eventually add TLC for tender loving care pendants for the women. Patty Perry says of her necklace, my TLC has never been off my neck since he gave it to me. I clean it and I had it reinforced, but it's going with me, you know? On December 19th, 1970, Vernon was going over his son's recent expenditures in his office. Guns, jewelry, 10 Mercedes-Benzes that were gifted out, including one Elvis had bought for Vernon. He had even footed the bill for Sonny's wedding. Vernon walked into the house and talked to Elvis about it, but they got into a big argument over it, with Priscilla joining in and siding with her father-in-law. Nash writes, Elvis didn't feel well. He was taking penicillin for an eye infection, and now outraged that the very people who lived large off his money would try to dictate how he spent it, he stormed out of the house and sped off, ending up at the airport. There he did something he had never done before in his life. He boarded a commercial airliner by himself and left the city without anyone knowing where he was or where he was going. Elvis decided he wanted to see Joyce Bova and her twin sister Janice in D.C. They hadn't spoken since he threw the pajamas at her in the hotel room and she left slamming the door. But for some reason, he felt she could sympathize with him at the time. Peter O. Whitmer says, there are 2 reasons for Elvis to hunger for that sort of connectivity with the twinned twins. First, there are psychological phenomenon so odd to a singleton that only another twin would understand with unconditional regard and agreement. Second, it undoubtedly transported him back to an emotional state that was far more static than the one he was actually in. To put it in simple terms, it is likened to 3 survivors of a tragedy. If 2 are still a pair, the third is the only one truly grasping the pain of losing a partner. Whitmer feels that Elvis going to see Joyce and her twin was a temporary fix, and that imagining a reunion with them may have felt deeply healing to him, but he still remained an outsider to their bond. Nash writes, when his plane landed in the nation's capital, Elvis arranged for Liberty limousine service to take him to the Hotel Washington, where he registered as John Burroughs, using his own address in Memphis. However, he had thrown away Joyce's telephone number after their altercation at the International that night, and now he didn't know how to find her, either at home or at work through government listings. Realizing he had no way to locate her alone, he couldn't take care of himself, so I don't know how he got here on an airplane, Joyce says. He checked out of the hotel and went back to the airport. So he booked a flight to go see his stewardess in Dallas, but while doing so, he got into a dispute with an agent who saw Elvis's gun and followed him onto the plane and demanded that it be handed over. Elvis was adamant about keeping his weapon and, embarrassed, got up and left, only to have the pilot chase after him and invite him back on the plane. When he arrived in Dallas, he learned that his stewardess was out on a flight. Hungry and not comfortable dining alone, Elvis called Jerry, who was working as a film editor at Paramount. It was around midnight, and Elvis woke Jerry up from sleep. Elvis said, "Jerry, I'm coming to Los Angeles." Jerry, half asleep, didn't think it was Elvis because it was that unusual for Elvis to pick up the phone himself and call someone. There were always people to do those things for him. Elvis said again, "Jerry, it's me. I'm going to be in Los Angeles at 2 a.m. Get a car, call Gerald, and meet me at the airport." Jerry wrote down Elvis's flight number, and Elvis told him not to tell anyone where he was. He wanted Vernon and Priscilla to sweat a little. Elvis's new limo driver, Gerald Peters, picked up Jerry from his apartment, and on the way to the airport made arrangements to be able to pick up Elvis directly at the plane. When Elvis walked off the plane, Jerry could see that he was really prepared. He came down the steps with a little cardboard box. I said, "What is that?" He said, "Well, I had to get some stuff for traveling." He had toothpaste, a toothbrush, a bar of soap, and a little wash rag. When they got into where there was some light, Jerry saw Elvis's face was all swollen up and he was in really bad shape. He had a rash on his face and neck worsened by the chocolate he had eaten on the flight. Jerry asked, "Elvis, what happened?" Elvis told him, "I got a real bad reaction to penicillin. Let's call a doctor right away." Jerry began calling around for a doctor who would make a house call when Elvis started talking to a flight attendant. Elvis said, "Jerry, we got to take her by her place." Jerry shook his head and said, "Okay, but I got a doctor up there on Hillcrest for you." All of a sudden, Elvis wasn't so concerned about his ailment. When they got to the flight attendant's place, they stayed in the car another hour while Elvis chatted with her. The doctor stayed all night monitoring Elvis, so Jerry stayed up too. The next morning, Elvis was feeling better, and he announced to Jerry that they would be flying out to Washington. Jerry remembers, "He didn't tell me why he wanted to go, and I didn't ask him." Elvis needed Jerry's help in locating Joyce, but he also wanted the narcotics badge. Elvis cashed a check for $500 at the Beverly Hills Hotel, and then they boarded their flight at LAX, and it would land at Washington National around 6 a.m. Elvis and Jerry were sat on the plane first before the other passengers could board. Jerry remembers that it was a heavy Christmas crowd, guys in uniform from Vietnam on the way home for the holiday. One service member stopped and spoke with Elvis. Then Jerry felt Elvis nudging him. Elvis said, "Where's that money?" And Jerry said, "I got it. It's safe." Elvis told him, "Give it to me." Jerry said, "Elvis, this is our expense money." Elvis said, "Jerry, he's going home for Christmas." Jerry told him, "Yes, but we won't have any money for tips." Elvis looked deflated. "The guy just got back from Vietnam." Jerry handed the cash to Elvis, who gave it to the soldier and wished him a Merry Christmas. During the flight, Elvis told Jerry he was going to see Deputy Director John Finlatter about the narcotics badge. Then Elvis was struck with another idea. He wanted to write a letter to President Richard Nixon. Nash writes, "Woozy-eyed and shaky, using the pull-down tray as a desk, he told the president that he was writing in his capacity as a concerned American, and that he had met Vice President Spiro Agnew in Palm Springs only several weeks before, and expressed his fears for the country. As he wrote the president, he was especially concerned about such subversive elements as the hippies, the drug culture, the Black Panthers, and the Students for a Democratic Society. But those groups do not consider me as their enemy, or as they call it, the establishment." He knew so because he had done an in-depth study of drug abuse and communist brainwashing techniques, and I am right in the middle of the whole thing where I can and will do the most good. Elvis insisted that if the president appointed him a federal agent at large, he was willing to remain in Washington as long as necessary. According to Jerry, Elvis felt partly responsible for the drug culture in music and wanted to help combat it, though he didn't seek to be a narcotics officer. And that Elvis's thinking was that if he were talking with someone in the entertainment field and he knew it was a bad drug situation, he wanted to scare them out of that type of environment without busting them. He liked to have credentials, and he wanted to be able to show them a badge. Elvis wrote in his letter, "I would love to meet you just to say hello if you're not too busy." They landed in Washington broke, and Elvis insisted on dropping off his letter at the gates of the White House himself. Then the limo service took them to the Hotel Washington, where Elvis would wait for the president's call. Later that day, Joyce was at her desk working when she got a phone call. The man on the phone said, "My name is Jerry Schilling. I'm a friend of Elvis Presley." She didn't know what to say. Jerry said, "It's because of Elvis that I'm calling. In fact, he's here in Washington and he wants to see you." Joyce said, Put Elvis on the phone," Nash writes. He was contrite now and told her he hadn't been himself the night that she walked out on him. He came to Washington, he said, to ask her to forgive him. She wasn't even sure what to say. Joyce asked Elvis, "How did you find me here anyway? I never gave you this number." He said, "It wasn't easy. I had Schilling here calling all over Congress looking for you." He told her how he'd been there a few days before and couldn't find her, then flew to California, and all he wanted to know now was where he should send the car to get her. Elvis added, "And honey, bring your sister." After that, Joyce remembers, Elvis always wanted my sister to come see him too. He was acutely aware of our closeness and understood that thing between twins and wanted it so badly himself. He always made her feel welcome anytime, anywhere, which was one of the qualities that was so precious about him and very important to me. Nash writes, by the time Joyce and Janice saw Elvis at the hotel that night, Sonny West had joined him, and Elvis had another story to tell. Outrageously dressed in his best Vegas does DC outfit, a velvet coat topping a black suede suit, a massive gold belt given to him by the International, glittering chain circling his neck, tinted sunglasses, and a cane, he got his meeting with the president in the Oval Office. He also came away with a promise of his cherished badge. John Finlatter turned him down, but the president, who later said how much he liked his visitor, wanted him to have it. During the meeting, President Nixon poked Elvis and said, "You dress kind of strange, don't you?" Elvis told him, "Well, Mr. President, you got your show and I got mine." That night, Elvis, Sonny, and Joyce took the limo to her home so she could gather some things to stay the night at the hotel. It was December 21st, 1970, and would be the first time she'd ever spend the night with Elvis Presley. She and Elvis were sitting on the edge of the bed when he said to her, "You're a beautiful woman, and you're a pure little girl too, aren't you?" She was wearing a flimsy nightgown, and she put her finger to his lips. He said, "Joyce, I know this is new for you, but it's right, believe me." Nash writes, her stomach was in knots. He'd had a very big day. He'd met the president, and soon he would have a really cool new badge. It was no time to disillusion him with confessions. That's it for chapter 29. Stay tuned for chapter 30, which is titled A Prince from Another Planet. See you then.